My husband almost died in a severe accident, and therefore my mother-in-law put his junkie brother first. So, here's the situation. My husband, 33M, was hit by a car while riding his e-bike 3 weeks ago. Thankfully, he's okay and didn't break any bones, which feels like a miracle considering the severity of the crash. However, he did suffer a traumatic brain injury, and the road to recovery has been tough. He's been dealing with a range of symptoms, including a decline in his mental health that he tries to hide. Normally, he's stoic, calm, and composed, sometimes even a bit angry, but now he's been crying at the smallest things, which even he finds unusual. Throughout this whole ordeal, I've been in close contact with his mother, 56F, updating her on his condition. She lives across the country, so she couldn't be here physically, but I felt it was important to keep her informed. When my husband was a child, he had a rare blood clot that caused permanent damage to his optic nerve, leading to significant vision issues. His mom was by his side for an entire year, working tirelessly to help him through that difficult time. Because of this history, and the fact that the blood clot he had back then made the recent brain bleed even more dangerous, I've kept my MIL updated on his progress. In the first 2 days after the accident, my brother-in-law, BIL, was present, but he quickly lost interest and left. He's a real piece of work, so I'm not going to get into the details. Then, about a week and a half after the incident, my MIL stopped responding to my updates altogether. My husband seemed to shrug it off, thinking she just assumed no news is good news, but I found it rude. Then, out of nowhere, my MIL texted last week saying she and her partner were coming to visit. I spoke to her sister, who lives nearby, and she told me that my MIL had been scrambling to find a cheap flight to come see my husband. He was visibly excited when he heard, though he tried to downplay it by saying, "Okay, cool. I know he's been missing her, especially with how emotionally unstable he's been, and I could tell he really wanted her around. We've been together for 11 years, and while I'm by his side, she's still his mom, and I think he needed that comfort." But then things took an unexpected turn. She didn't give us an exact day, and when she finally texted today, she said she was on her way back from her sister's house, planning to visit my BIL, get a motel, and then, if it wasn't too late, stop by and say hi. To say we were both surprised would be an understatement. We felt a mix of happiness that she was coming, but also a deep sadness. The sadness stemmed from the fact that instead of coming directly to see her son, who had a near-death experience and is recovering from a serious brain injury, she chose to drive 2.5 hours north to visit her 3-year-old granddaughter, who's currently living with her aunt due to my BIL's serious issues. After that, she planned to visit my BIL, get a motel near him, and then maybe stop by to see my husband if she wasn't too tired. My husband, ever the good son, said it was fine, but I could see he was hurt. He tried to downplay it, but I could tell. Hours later, as I feared, she called to say she was tired from the long drive and that she would see us whenever tomorrow. This was the final straw for me. My husband tried to suppress his emotions, saying he was fine and didn't know why he was reacting the way he was, but I knew it was breaking him. At this point, I'm struggling with the thought of confronting her. I know she's dealing with a lot, especially with my BIL's issues, but I'm furious. My husband almost died, and instead of coming to see him first, she chose to visit everyone else, who, in my opinion, are not as important right now. The fact that she kept making excuses and didn't make her son a priority, after he's been through something so traumatic, really hit me hard. I want to tell her exactly how I feel, but I don't know if I'm crossing a line. My husband's brother, my BIL, has always had this complex where he thinks my husband is the favorite just because he was born first. Growing up, he'd use my husband's medical issues as ammo against him, and even now, at 31 years old, he still holds onto this childish jealousy. My MIL is a pushover, and she bends to whatever my BIL wants. Every time she visits, it's always on his terms. She spends a majority of her visit with him, and my husband gets maybe a few hours with her at the end of her trip. It's incredibly frustrating for my husband, and I can tell it affects him deeply, even if he doesn't show it. The thing is, I don't want to make a huge scene. My MIL has been a huge help to us over the years, and I know she's going through a lot with my BIL and his situation. She's trying to help him get his daughter back, which I admire, even if he doesn't deserve it. But I can't just sit by and watch my husband, who's been through so much, be put on the back burner again. She promised she would come to see him, and instead, she's prioritizing everyone else. I'm struggling with whether I should confront her and express how much this has hurt us, especially my husband. On one hand, I feel like I would be justified in calling her out for making my husband feel like he doesn't matter. On the other hand, I don't want to make her cry or escalate things unnecessarily, especially since she has been a supportive person in our lives. I feel like I need to say something to her tomorrow when she finally comes to visit, but I'm torn. If anyone has advice on how to handle this, it would be really appreciated. I just want to do what's best for my husband, but I don't want to make things worse. I want to punch my stupid BIL in the face, where I might be wrong. I'll admit my brother-in-law, BIL, hasn't done anything wrong recently, at least not in a direct way. I don't think he specifically told my mother-in-law, MIL, to do what she did, and right now he's been acting somewhat decently. He's been going to therapy and, for the time being, seems to be making an effort to get his life together so that he can eventually get his daughter back. So, as much as I'd like to punch him in the face, doing so would be totally out of line and, honestly, it would make me look like a jerk. But here's the thing. My BIL is still, at his core, a selfish and manipulative person. To sum up his character in the most basic way, he's narcissistic, he thrives on control, and he has some deep-rooted mental health issues that he refuses to address. His drug problems have been ongoing for over a decade, and they've gotten progressively worse. He has no problem using his mental health and addiction as weapons to manipulate people, especially my MIL, who can't say no to him. If you're not constantly doing him favors or kissing his feet, he assumes you hate him, and in some cases, he has even threatened to hurt himself. He's gone so far as to take himself to a bridge, only to back off at the last moment, admitting later that he was bluffing. His actions have caused a lot of pain for our family. He's been involved in several situations where people have ended up arrested, and we've spent years dealing with ridiculous court cases because of his schemes. He has a history of violence. Too, once he headbutted me during an argument, causing a permanent neurological disorder. That's just one example of the kind of person he is. On top of everything else, he's taken advantage of his mother, a woman who is truly one of the kindest people I've ever known. He's stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from her over the years, all while playing the poor me card, claiming that my husband is her favorite child. This, despite the fact that my husband doesn't even speak to his mother more than once a month. The truth is, my husband had a serious medical issue as a child that made him the focus of his mother's attention for a while, but it's not because he was the favorite. My BIL has played the victim for so long that he uses it to manipulate anyone who will listen. It's honestly exhausting. I mean, to this day, my BIL fights with my husband over whose childhood Pokemon cards are whose. We've had to hide his childhood things because he has a habit of stealing if things aren't carefully monitored. And it goes beyond just the petty stuff. He's a toxic person to be around. When I think about everything he's done, the lies, the manipulation, the countless times he's hurt people, it makes me want to lash out. I've seen it all, up close, and it's been awful. But recently, he's been doing better, or at least trying to. According to his girlfriend, he's making progress in therapy, and he's cut back on his drug use. So for now, he's not dragging anyone else down with him. I'll give him credit where it's due. He's making an effort. However, the way my MIL behaved last week really got under my skin. The whole reason she came to visit was because my husband had been in a horrific accident. He was hit by a car while riding his bike, and while he's lucky to be alive, he's still recovering from a brain bleed. She told us that she wanted to visit him, to see him and hug him. But instead, what did she do? She spent the entire day visiting my BIL and his daughter before even considering coming to see my husband. And get this, after spending time with my BIL, she decided to get a motel room and call it a night. So, she told my husband and me, essentially, to fuck off until tomorrow. My husband was visibly upset but didn't show it, trying to brush it off, but I could tell he was hurt. And honestly, I was too. I can't help but think this was all because my BIL had some sort of issue, something to complain about, and my MIL, being the pushover that she is, dropped everything to cater to him. She's done this so many times before. The second he says something, even just hints at being upset, she's there, running to make things right. It's like a pattern, and I'm so tired of watching it happen. I also suspect that when my husband was in the hospital, my BIL was secretly hoping that my husband's brain bleed meant money for him, but as soon as he heard that my husband would be okay and was being sent home, he lost interest and stormed off. It's been 3 weeks now, and he hasn't bothered to reach out, not even a text. But here my MIL is, prioritizing him again, after all that's happened. In the end, I'm left thinking, am I wrong to be angry at her? I know my MIL is a good person, and she's been incredibly helpful to us over the years. But the way she's acting right now feels like a betrayal. She knew how much my husband wanted to see her, how much he needed her, especially after everything he's been through. And yet, she chose to prioritize my BIL, a man who has hurt our family in more ways than I can count. So, should I say something? Should I let my MIL know how hurtful her actions were? Or should I keep quiet, as my husband suggests, because she's dealing with her own stresses? I'm just so frustrated, and I'm not sure what the right course of action is. I'm worried that confronting her will only make things worse, but I don't know how much longer I can stay silent while my husband's heart breaks. Yesterday, my husband and I waited all day for my mother-in-law, MIL, to call us and let us know when she was coming over to visit. By 1 p.m., I was getting frustrated because she hadn't reached out yet, so I texted her. Her response sent me into a spiral of anger. She told me that she and her partner were having lunch with my brother-in-law, BIL, my sister-in-law, SIL, and their daughter, who had been given a surprise visitation day. She said that after lunch, once my niece went home at 3 p.m., she'd come to see us. I was furious, but I tried to remain calm for the sake of my husband. He was clearly upset, but kept pretending everything was fine. Finally, at around 5:30 p.m., we got the call that Emile was on her way. At last. We had plans for her to pick us up and go get pizza, which was something my husband had come up with to make the best of the situation. He also suggested going to see a movie and maybe playing some pool afterward, which his mother loves. But when she arrived, Emile told us she had to go back to BIL's house after dinner. Of course. So, instead of our original plan, we were going to grab pizza and then head over to BIL's place. We didn't argue. I didn't want to make things worse, so we followed her plan. She did come up to our apartment to briefly say hi to my dad, who lives with us, but her visit was short. She seemed eager to leave. The only reason we stuck around was because Emile had brought her sister, Kay, 60F, who hadn't been around in years. Kay specifically came to see my husband, so I was trying to keep my temper in check. But Emile seemed more interested in chatting with my dad, flipping through hospital paperwork and accident reports, while my husband was clearly uncomfortable, and I had to keep reminding him to sit down and drink something. He was looking worse by the minute, and I knew something was off. We eventually left and got our pizza. Afterward, we went to BIL's house and spent 2 hours listening to him complain about his life. How his job sucks, his car is broken, he can't get what he wants because everyone's always fighting him. It was hard to listen to, especially since my husband was looking more and more unwell. Kay and I kept asking him if he was okay and urging him to go to the hospital, but he was getting confused. His condition was worsening and I could see it. At that point, Kay suggested we take him home, but my SIL, who's been through her own traumatic brain injury, insisted that we call an ambulance. She said she could sense something was seriously wrong. Usually my husband would have refused, but this time he didn't say a word. I knew then that something wasn't right, so I made the call. Emile and BIL acted like they weren't too concerned, downplaying it by saying, "He's just tired. He just needs to rest." It wasn't until my husband vomited on the floor that they started to take it seriously. I was on the phone with the ambulance when all hell broke loose. Suddenly, I heard a loud yelp followed by the sound of glass shattering. There was a flurry of shouting, and when I turned around, it was chaos. My husband's head had dropped to the ground, and Kay wasn't close enough to catch him, so he hit the floor. Emile was trying to hold BIL back from attacking SIL, who was lying in a pool of broken glass. And my husband was having a grand mal seizure right next to them. The panic I felt is something I can't describe. I knew seizure protocol, as I've dealt with epilepsy before, but in that moment, I was frozen with fear. I didn't even realize the EMTs and police had arrived until they rushed in. They heard the crash through the phone and assumed it was an emergency, so they sent officers along with the ambulance. They took my husband to the hospital and rushed him into the ICU after a CT scan. They found that he had suffered a rebleed, and it had grown 2 centimeters, putting more pressure on his brain, which triggered the seizure. I knew this could happen, but it's still hard to see the person you love go through that. In the meantime, BIL was arrested for his violent outburst, which is a relief, but I'm not sure if my SIL will press charges. She's been through so much with him, and I worry about what will happen with their daughter. And MIL is staying with SIL to keep her company, but she should have been there for my husband instead. I talked to Kay about why MIL seems so detached from everything, and she said it's strange, because this is so out of character for her. Kay doesn't think MIL is on drugs, but something is definitely wrong. Right now, though, I don't care about anything except my husband. I ended up having a conversation with MIL last night. I calmly told her how her neglect had affected my husband and how I hoped this situation would open her eyes. I told her she needs to stop prioritizing BIL, a violent man who doesn't deserve her attention. Her response was just silence. She's supposed to be here in half an hour, but I don't even know if she will show up. BIL is supposed to be released on bail this morning, and I suspect she'll run off to be with him instead. As for my husband, we're still waiting for any news other than bad news. The doctors are monitoring the rebleed, and if it doesn't stop, they'll have to transfer him to a larger hospital for surgery. I'm terrified, but all I can do is stay by his side and provide any information they might need about him. I don't know how I'd live in this world without him. I also realized that Emile had only planned to stay in town for 2 days. She had told us that the second day was for us, but it turns out she planned to take BIL and his family to the beach the next day. Her visit was a farce. I don't know what her plans are now, but I'm done hoping for her to be the support we need right now. All I want is for my husband to survive. Hello, everyone. I honestly wasn't expecting such an overwhelming response from all of you. Your well wishes, support, and advice have been invaluable. They've made these long, stressful hours feel a little less isolating. I want to thank each of you for reaching out. It has truly helped me get through this time. Now, for the update. I hope this addresses some of the concerns and questions you all had. Shortly after my last update, my husband had another CT scan, and at first, things were looking good. The bleed hadn't grown, and we were hopeful. He was placed on a 6-hour observation period until the next scan to determine if he could be deemed stable. But just 2 hours later, he had another grand mal seizure. This one lasted only 2 minutes, thankfully, but it was enough to raise concerns. The doctors debated whether another CT scan was needed, unsure if this could be a cluster of seizures. After about an hour, they decided to do the scan. In the meantime, they prepared the helicopter in case they needed to transfer him to a larger city an hour away for surgery, as our current hospital wasn't equipped for what he might need. The seizure had unfortunately caused a significant increase in the bleed. What had started as a manageable issue was now huge. It was 5.3 centimeters and had begun leaking toward his ventricles. Miraculously, my husband remained conscious, though he wasn't really aware of his surroundings. He could barely speak, but he recognized me, and we were able to exchange our special goodbye before they took him off to the helicopter. I wanted to go with him, but the medical staff told me it would be better if I drove myself. Apparently, my weight could slow them down and they needed the space. I didn't argue, though I was frustrated and left with Kay since I wasn't able to drive. During the drive to the city, I called my mother-in-law, Emile, to update her on the situation and to check on what was going on with my sister-in-law, Sal. I had been mostly ignoring their texts because I had been focused on my husband. Emile immediately began freaking out, telling me she was already on the road and coming to the city as well. Sal was with her, and once she took the phone, I found out that my brother-in-law, Bil, had been arrested for domestic violence and drug possession. Apparently, he'd been caught with drugs at the time of his arrest. Sal was fine, but she had a cut on her eyebrow from some glass. By the time I arrived at the hospital in the city, my husband was already in surgery. The plan was to stop the bleeding at its source and remove some of the blood that had built up, as it was putting too much pressure on his brain. He had another seizure during the helicopter ride, which made the situation worse. I wasn't told the exact size of the bleed at that point, but it was clear that things had become much more complicated. All I could do was wait for updates. This wasn't the first time I'd been stuck in a hospital waiting room, hoping that someone I loved would survive a life-threatening situation. It felt like a curse that's followed me since childhood. The shadow of death seems to linger around me, and I prayed that today would be an exception. Emile arrived about half an hour after me. She was hysterical, apologizing and begging the doctors to let her into the surgery room, but of course, it was too late for that. After being told no, she began to calm down, though I spent a lot of time telling her off. I couldn't help it. I was so angry with her for abandoning my husband at a time when he needed her most. She had let him down by focusing on my BIL, who had caused so much trouble in our lives. I told her how hurt I was that she used our family's kindness against us to drag us into her son's mess. She listened quietly, tears streaming down her face, absorbing every word. I didn't feel better after venting, though. It didn't ease the pain of what had happened or the years of resentment that had been building between us. But then, seeing her like that, so broken, so regretful, made me feel even worse. I realized how much she had done for us over the years, how much she had helped. She had opened her home to us when we struggled, helped us in countless ways, and even taught me how to crochet, something I still enjoy to this day. Her response, however, took me by surprise. She and SIL had been working for a year to arrange the adoption of my niece, secretly behind BIL's back, and even behind all of ours. When SIL had overdosed a year ago and they lost custody of my niece, there were strict rules to regain custody. SIL had been doing everything right, going through recovery, but BIL was uncooperative, making things unnecessarily difficult. He had been completely unresponsive to the authorities, which made it impossible for him to know anything about the adoption proceedings. Emile had been trying to get BIL to comply, but when he stole her car to go find drugs, she realized she had no choice but to go ahead with the adoption plans. The secrecy around this trip was because everything was being finalized that week. Emile wanted us all to gather that night to tell BIL the news. She even wanted to celebrate, though I wasn't sure how. I wasn't sure how I felt about the whole situation, but I wanted to be there when BIL was told. I can't lie, I would probably laugh at his reaction when he finds out what's been happening behind his back. When I asked Emile why she had waited so long to report BIL, especially when she knew what was going on, she explained that she didn't want to ruin the adoption process. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was prioritizing the adoption over my SIL's safety. Still, SIL reassured me that everything had worked out perfectly, even if no one expected the events that led to my husband's condition. After hearing their explanations, I was left numb, angry, confused, and unable to process it all. I was furious at both of them, yet they admitted their faults. Emile couldn't erase her actions, and though they seemed sincere in wanting to make up for it, I wasn't sure I could forgive them. I tried to understand their reasoning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my husband had suffered because of their mistakes. I told them both that they were lucky I wasn't pressing charges for their negligence, and they agreed, admitting that they deserved whatever consequences came their way. 8 hours after the surgery, my husband finally came out alive. Thank God. The doctors had managed to stop the bleeding, but the damage was worse than they had initially realized. The blood buildup had caused immense pressure on his optical nerves, which were already weakened from a childhood aneurysm. As a result, my husband is temporarily blind. He woke up yesterday, but his vision is completely gone. He had some sight before, but now it's gone completely. Despite this, he is still my husband. He is alive, cognitive, and his motor functions are intact, though his speech is slurred. His memory is a bit foggy, but he remembered me and his mom, and he recognized our special words. Even though he's blind, he's surprisingly calm. He said it felt kind of nostalgic in a way. He kept asking about everything that had happened, so I told him the entire story. He fell asleep halfway through, but when he woke up, he wanted to hear the rest. I know he needs rest, but my husband is the kind of person who can't stand not knowing what's going on. He needs answers, and I don't want to hold anything back from him. I'm just grateful he's alive. ML is staying in the city with me along with SIL, and they're covering the cost of my hotel. Kay will leave in 2 days, since her vacation is over, and she has to go back to work. We're all still waiting to hear news on BIL, and I'm also trying to contact the hospital that treated my husband's childhood aneurysm to see if anyone from the original team is still around. This case has baffled the doctors, and my husband's condition is rare. The hospital is working hard to figure out the best course of action for his recovery. There's a lot more I could share, but this is where we are now. It's been an exhausting, emotional journey, but I'm holding on. Thank you again for your support. I'm starting to use this Reddit as a sort of diary these days. I love reading the comments and venting to someone other than my family. My husband and I don't have many friends, being pretty introverted, so this feels like a safe space to express everything. There's not a lot of new information, but here's the update so far. My husband is still in the hospital and remains blind. The doctors have reached out to some of the neurologists who treated him when he was a child, but unfortunately, they haven't been able to find any answers yet. The bleeding hasn't worsened, but the swelling in his brain hasn't gone down much either. At least his blood pressure has remained stable, which is a relief. My mother-in-law, MIL, had to head back home. She wasn't happy about leaving, but she's planning to move closer to us now, rather than moving my niece into her house, as she originally intended. She's already contacted a realtor to find a house nearby, so she's committed to this decision. She had to go back with her partner, who's been by her side the whole time since she returned with my sister-in-law, SIL, from the hospital, to pack up their belongings and get everything in order. I've been keeping her updated on my husband's progress. She's been gone for 3 days now, and she's expected to return sometime next week. My niece will stay with my aunt-in-law until she comes back. As for my SIL, she's staying with me for now. I haven't been home much except to grab things for my husband, so she's been helping take care of my dad, who's elderly but still mostly independent, and my cats. Honestly, she's been a lifesaver. Her job is very flexible, so she's been able to take time off to help me out. It's been a huge relief to have her around, especially since it keeps her distracted from the chaos with my brother-in-law, BIL. I've mostly been working with my husband's doctors and therapists every day, trying to manage everything with the lawyers regarding the accident that led to all of this, and trying to juggle all the paperwork. It's been overwhelming, but I'm fine.
No need to worry about me.
I'm making the most of his time with my husband. He's still dealing with a lot of neurological issues that seem to change every day, so it's hard to predict what's next. We're just taking it one day at a time. And about BIL, his first trial was rescheduled. He attempted suicide while in holding after my SIL told him about my husband's condition, so now he's in some sort of mental health evaluation hold. SIL didn't explain the details very well, and I'm not in the mood to dig into it right now. He still doesn't know about my niece either, and SIL decided to wait until he's seen a therapist before telling him. I told her to just get it over with, but she's still considering how best to handle it. I'll post again if there's any new development. Happy doom scrolling, everyone! Hello everyone, this is going to be a very long update, so buckle up. If you think it's too long, honestly, just move on. This is my space to express everything, and if you're not up for it, no one is forcing you to read. First, I want to address a few points and clear up some confusion that's come up in the comments. I didn't initially force my husband to go to the hospital because he's incredibly stubborn. Unless he's completely out of it, he will do everything in his power to avoid doctors or any medical intervention. I'm also much smaller than him, so physically forcing him wasn't an option. A lot of people mention that because I described him as being angry in the past, it somehow means he's a bad person. That couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, he has a fiery temper, but he's never been unkind to me or anyone else. His anger comes from a lifetime of frustrations. Life can be infuriating, and he's just learned to express it differently than others. Some of you were also confused about the situation with BIL and the adoption process. To clarify, BIL was informed about the adoption. He received multiple letters, emails, and phone messages about his court date, where he could have shared his side of the story. However, he ignored every one of them, and as a result, the judge ruled that he was uncooperative and denied him any parental rights. My SIL also voluntarily signed away her rights, so the adoption proceeded without issues after that. As for the specifics in my earlier posts, those were written in the middle of an incredibly stressful situation. I may have mixed up some details or gotten things wrong. My emotions were all over the place. For example, I mentioned trauma center levels, and that was what I had been told at the time. I may have misunderstood some of it, but the key point is that the first hospital we went to wasn't equipped to handle my husband's condition, so he was transferred to a better one. Regarding the helicopter ride, I was in a state of panic, and looking back, I know I could have handled it better. But in that moment, all I cared about was being with my husband. Some of you mentioned that I was a terrible person for not staying by my husband's side constantly. I see your point, but the reality is that I don't have many friends or family, and the people I have, including you here on the internet, have been my outlet. I needed to vent somewhere, and when my husband regained some awareness, he actually encouraged me to keep sharing, saying it helped me stay focused while he rebooted mentally. So, while yes, I probably should have been more attentive, he didn't mind at all. In fact, he found comfort in hearing messages from strangers, and he even told me to ignore the negative comments. He made it clear that no one owns me, and that I was doing what I needed to do. Some people have criticized us for not cutting BIL off sooner, and I can't deny that you're right. But it wasn't that simple. My husband loved his brother, and for a long time, so did my MIL. They didn't want to give up on him. Sadly, BIL, being a self-serving addict, often manipulated them into thinking he was improving, only to let them down again. It became a cycle, and I don't have the energy to dissect it anymore. Now, about my passive behavior during all of this. I know it was wrong, but I've struggled with being extremely passive my whole life, a result of various forms of abuse I endured growing up. It's something I'm still trying to come to terms with, and it's left me with a lot of mental baggage. In stressful situations, I freeze up like a deer caught in headlights. Even when BIL did me wrong, I found myself going along with others' decisions. Living with my husband's family made it even harder to establish boundaries, especially when we were both struggling financially. Once we got our own place, we pulled back, but by then it was too late. Now for the update. My husband passed away. I've been in a mental health facility after attempting suicide multiple times. My SAL and MIL have moved in with my father to help him, and BIL has been sentenced to 20 years for various crimes. Apparently, he's found religion, but honestly, I don't care right now. It's been difficult to write this. The physicians and workers here encouraged me to get everything out in one go. They wanted me to address the guilt I've been carrying for leaving everyone hanging. They're monitoring what I say, and if anyone from the facility is reading this, hi Bill, Tasha. A week after my last update, my husband passed away. Initially, he had been responding well to treatments. The bleeding in his brain had stopped, and his vision remained stable. He was talking, eating, laughing. He was starting to feel like himself again. But then, his brain started swelling uncontrollably, and he had a seizure in front of me, which led to his death. At first, they thought it was a sudden, unexplained death in epilepsy, SUDEP, but then he began bleeding from his nose. It happened so suddenly, and I can still hear his last words to me over and over. After that, I attempted to take my life. I climbed the roof of the hospital, but security stopped me, and I was placed in the mental health ward for a few days before the funeral. Afterward, I was released into the care of my MIL and SIL, and we went to my husband's funeral. He was cremated, and I received his ashes. The ceremony was simple, exactly how he would have wanted it, even though my MIL took charge of the planning. That night, after my SIL accidentally fell asleep while keeping watch over me, I tried to jump off a bridge. Someone saw me and pulled me from the river just in time. I was sent back to the hospital, and now I'm here. I haven't been home in weeks. I want to leave this place, but I know I'm not ready. I've been having both auditory and visual hallucinations, and a recent incident helped me realize just how far gone I am. I reached out to my SIL to apologize for being selfish and running away, but she was just relieved I was okay. She and MIL have been visiting me daily since I was allowed visitors. MIL is struggling with my husband's death, but she's seeing a therapist and seems to be coping better than I am. I don't remember much of the time between my husband's passing and now. It's all a blur, blocked out by my mind. I know I'm not okay, and I feel like everything that's happened is my fault. But please don't tell Bill and Tasha I said that. As for Bill, he's apparently found religion after trying to take his own life in prison. In court, he thanked the judge for his 20-year sentence. I don't know if it's a genuine change or just a tactic to get out early, but honestly, I don't care. I'm so far removed from caring about him or anyone else right now. I know some of you might call me evil or selfish. I feel that way too. I miss my husband, and I feel guilty for leaving my dad and the cats behind, but I can't imagine living without him. After everything I've done wrong in my life, I need to apologize to him. Grief is awful. I know I'm not making sense right now, but it's the truth. And to the system here. Well, let's just say I hate the lack of privacy and control over my own life. It's been hard. So, that's where I stand for now. I don't know what's coming next or if I'll post again, but if I can, I'll try to respond. Adulting feels impossible when your world has crumbled.